300 people held their breath. The motorcade should not have been there. Not at a suburban Portland wedding. Not rolling through wrought iron gates flanked by hydrangeas and valet stands. But there it was, two police motorcycles with lights pulsing in short, official bursts, a black Range Rover bearing diplomatic plates, and behind it, a Bentley state limousine that even the wealthiest guests recognized from televised royal processions. The string quartet choked mid-note. Pachelbel's cannon collapsed into silence. A man in formal livery stepped from the Range Rover and opened the Bentley's rear door with military precision. Out stepped a figure that did not belong in Oregon. Sebastian Blackwell, Duke of Ravenscroft, wore full ceremonial regalia. A midnight blue velvet tailcoat embroidered with gold heraldic insignia at the shoulders, a cream silk waistcoat, white gloves, and a row of ancestral decorations glinting against his chest. He looked as though Windsor Castle had mislaid him. He turned and extended one gloved hand into the car. A woman took it. She rose from the Bentley in sapphire silk, dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, a single emerald ring catching the August sun like a green flare. She placed her hand in the crook of his arm, and for one perfect, unhurried moment, they simply stood there. Poised, elegant, absolutely undeniable. At the altar, the groom's face drained to chalk. The bride forgot her bouquet, and near the rose arbor, a woman in champagne silk, the groom's mother, the architect of this entire day, looked as though the earth had opened beneath her Louboutins. Because the woman stepping out of that Bentley was Vivian Cross, the ex-wife, the one they had thrown away with $3,000 and a Honda Civic. She was back, and she had brought a Duke. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. 6 weeks earlier, a cream-colored envelope had detonated Vivian Cross's quiet Tuesday evening. She found it on the doormat of her Cambridge apartment, forwarded from an address she had not used in 3 years. The cardstock was heavy and gold embossed, the kind that whispered money without saying anything interesting. Inside, an invitation to the wedding of Grant Pemberton and Sloane Whitfield, to be held at the Pemberton Estate in Portland's West Hills. Grant Pemberton, her ex-husband, the man whose family had discarded her like a seasonal decoration. Vivian might have recycled it without a second thought, if not for the handwritten note tucked behind the RSVP card. Constance Pemberton's spidery cursive covered a small piece of personal stationery. Dear Vivian, we thought you would want to witness Grant's happiness. He is marrying into the Whitfield family. Perhaps you have read about them in the business section. Sloane's father controls. We do hope you have found your footing since the divorce. Do come if you can manage the travel expenses. No gift necessary. We understand funds must be tight. Vivian read it once, then again, then a third time, each pass stripping away another layer of pretense until the naked cruelty underneath was fully exposed. Constance wanted her there, wanted her to sit among 300 strangers and feel the gravitational pull of everything she had never been good enough to keep. The invitation was not kindness. It was a final, exquisitely wrapped twist of the knife. Vivian set the card on the kitchen counter. She looked down at her left hand, where an emerald surrounded by diamonds caught the overhead light and threw tiny green sparks across the ceiling. She picked up her phone. One text, one word, one destination. Portland, August 15th. We are going. Sebastian Blackwell's reply arrived in 4 seconds. I will have Philip arrange the regalia. Constance Pemberton had no idea what she had just started. To understand what happened at that wedding, you need to understand what happened before it. Vivian Cross married Grant Pemberton when she was 25. They had met at Reed College, where Grant was charming in the effortless way of men who have never been denied anything. He remembered her coffee order. He laughed at her jokes. He showed up. She knew his family had money. She did not understand what that meant until she saw the Pemberton estate for the first time. 5 acres of manicured grounds, a stone manor built in 1924, leaded windows, architecture magazine pedigree. The kind of place where the hedges had names. The wedding reception was held in the estate's garden. 200 guests, champagne fountains, a string quartet. Vivian felt like a princess for approximately 90 minutes. Then Constance Pemberton approached her with a silver serving tray. Dear, the catering staff is overwhelmed. Would you mind supervising the appetizers? Vivian laughed. Constance did not. The guests are waiting, Vivian. The help needs direction. Vivian looked across the lawn for Grant. He was laughing with his fraternity brothers. He glanced over once, shrugged one shoulder, and turned back to his conversation. She took the tray. That single moment set the rhythm of the next 3 years. Vivian became furniture in the Pemberton household, always present, never acknowledged. At family dinners, Constance seated her at the far end of the table, beyond the reach of meaningful conversation. When important guests arrived, introductions followed a careful hierarchy. This is Senator Aldrich and his wife. This is the Harborough family from the Development Board. A vague gesture in Vivian's direction. Oh, and that is Vivian. She is with Grant. Not our daughter-in-law. Not Grant's wife. With Grant. Like a handbag. Like an afterthought. The charity galas were worse. Portland's social elite gathered monthly, and Constance insisted Vivian attend. People talk if the wife does not appear. But appearing meant standing silently while Constance worked the room, and whenever Vivian attempted to join a conversation, Constance materialized at her elbow with a task. Vivian, dear, would you check on the coat room? Vivian, the auction table needs organizing. Vivian, someone spilled wine near the entrance. Best handle it quickly. Each errand a surgical extraction from any position of importance. Grant never objected. When Vivian raised the subject, he sighed and called her sensitive. Thanksgiving of their second year, Constance seated her at the children's table. Actual children. Grant's teenage cousins, ages 13 to 16. The main table is full, dear. You do not mind, do you? The children need supervision. Vivian minded. She minded so much that her hands shook as she cut turkey for a 14-year-old who kept asking if she was the babysitter. Grant walked past that table twice during dinner. He did not say a word. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday in October, 3 years after the wedding. Vivian was making chicken piccata, Grant's favorite, when he walked into the kitchen carrying a leather folder. He sat on the counter without ceremony. What is this? Vivian asked. Divorce papers. My attorney reviewed them. You just need to sign. The wooden spoon slipped from her fingers and clattered against the pan. The sound was very loud in the quiet kitchen. Mother helped me see clearly, Grant continued, loosening his tie, not meeting her eyes. This is not working. We are not compatible. Compatible. Vivian's voice cracked. Grant, we are married. We took vows. The prenup is straightforward. You will receive $3,000 and you can keep the Honda. That is fair given the circumstances. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of swallowed humiliation, of bitten tongues and silver trays. And he was offering her $3,000 and a car with a dying transmission. The circumstances? Her voice came out flat, dangerously flat. What circumstances, Grant? He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his face was not anger. It was not even contempt. It was indifference. The complete, disinterested blankness of a man returning a purchase that no longer pleased him. You were never going to fit in, Vivian. Mother tried. I tried. But you are just. He waved a hand, searching for a word that would not sound too cruel. He did not find one. You are not from our world. This is better for everyone. Vivian signed the papers that night. Not because she agreed. Not because it was fair. But because she understood, with the cold clarity of a woman who has finally stopped hoping, that fighting for a marriage to a man who had never valued her was a war she had already lost. Constance was waiting in the foyer the next morning when Vivian came downstairs with her suitcase. She handed over an envelope containing a cashier's check for $3,000 and smiled. I am sure you will land on your feet, dear. You seem resourceful. The taxi to the Greyhound station cost $60. The bus ticket to Boston cost another $140. Vivian Cross left Portland with $2,800, one suitcase, and the absolute, bone-deep certainty that she would never let anyone make her feel worthless again. 6 months in Boston taught Vivian what freedom tasted like. Her Cambridge studio apartment was barely 400 square feet. The kitchenette required choreographic precision. The radiator clanked at 3 in the morning, but it was hers. No one critiqued her furniture. No one asked about her pedigree. The landlord handed her the keys without inquiring who her people were. The Fog Art Museum hired her as a junior curator after a single interview. For the first time in years, colleagues listened when Vivian spoke. They invited her to lunch. No one dispatched her to supervise coat rooms. She started breathing easier. On a Tuesday in April, Vivian ducked into Raven Used Books during her lunch break. The shop occupied a narrow building on JFK Street. 3 floors of crammed shelves, the smell of old paper, and the particular silence of a place where people come to disappear. She was hunting for a specific volume on Renaissance portraiture, Berenson's analysis of attribution methods. The art history section lived on the second floor, tucked into an alcove near the back. Vivian found the spine wedged between two oversized catalogs and reached for it. Another hand touched the same book at the exact same moment. Apologies. A man's voice. British accent. Warm, with an undercurrent of amusement and taste. Vivian looked up into blue eyes and a smile that seemed genuinely entertained rather than politely vacant. The man was tall, mid-30s, wearing a wool peacoat that had seen better decades and a scarf that looked hand-knit by someone who loved him. Nothing about him suggested wealth or status. He looked like a visiting lecturer, the kind of person who actually read the books he bought rather than displaying them as set decoration. You can have it, Vivian said, stepping back. I was just browsing. Nonsense. You reached it first. He pulled the volume free and offered it to her. Besides, I am only here because someone told me Berenson was essential reading for understanding Florentine workshops. You look like someone who already knows whether that is true. Vivian found herself smiling despite the armor she usually wore around strangers. It depends on whether you trust his eye or his ego. Berenson was brilliant, but he authenticated paintings that turn out to be questionable. Questionable how? He was paid by dealers. The more paintings he attributed to major artists, the more money changed hands. His scholarship was solid, but his motives were not always pure. The man's eyebrows rose. You have just made this infinitely more interesting than the dry recommendation I received. He extended a hand. Sebastian. Sebastian Blackwell. Vivian Cross. Are you a scholar, Vivian? You speak about authentication like someone who does it professionally. Junior curator at the Fog. I research provenance for European paintings. His face lit with genuine interest, and in that light, something shifted. Not romantically, not yet, but Vivian recognized the look of a person who actually wanted to hear what she would say next. That question opened a conversation that lasted 40 minutes. They stood in that cramped bookstore aisle debating Caravaggio's use of light, the problem of workshop copies versus master originals, whether modern technology had rendered traditional connoisseurship obsolete. Sebastian listened like her words mattered. He asked follow-up questions that proved he had absorbed every detail. Would you consider continuing this over coffee? He asked finally. I feel I owe you the Berenson as tuition for the education you have just given me. Vivian surprised herself by saying yes. Cafe Pamplona became their regular haunt. Coffee became Saturday morning walks along the Charles River. Sebastian was in Boston for something he vaguely described as estate research. He rode the T without complaint, wore the same rotation of sweaters, and appeared at her door on Sunday mornings carrying chocolate croissants from Flour Bakery and the New York Times. 3 months passed. He never dropped names or mentioned connections. He asked about her work and remembered the names of difficult colleagues. When the museum hosted a lecture on Baroque ceiling frescoes, he rearranged his schedule to attend, catching her eye from the back row whenever the speaker echoed a point she had made weeks earlier. He was normal, refreshingly, wonderfully, stubbornly normal. Vivian had not realized how badly she needed normal until she had it. 4 months into their relationship, Sebastian invited Vivian to Newport for the weekend. Fair warning, he said over coffee at Pamplona. It is a tedious family obligation. A reception at Rosecliff. Lots of speeches about historical preservation and donor recognition. But the mansion is worth seeing, even if the event will not be. Vivian had heard him mention his family's preservation work in passing, always in vague terms. always deflecting specifics. She assumed they were involved with some British Heritage Foundation, the kind that maintained crumbling estates for the National Trust. They drove down on a Friday afternoon in Sebastian's rental sedan. Nothing flashy. The conversation flowed easily as they passed through Providence and followed the coast. Rosecliff appeared through the trees, like a hallucination from the Gilded Age. The Baroque Revival mansion overlooked the Atlantic, its white terracotta facade glowing in late afternoon light. Cars lined the circular drive, Mercedes, Bentleys, a few vehicles with diplomatic plates. Quite the crowd for a preservation event, Vivian observed. Sebastian's expression became carefully neutral. Yes, about that. Before he could finish, a valet opened Vivian's door. A second man in formal livery approached Sebastian's side. Good evening, Your Grace. Welcome to Rosecliff. Vivian's blood turned to ice water. Your Grace. A woman in an elegant black suit emerged from the mansion entrance and executed a flawless curtsy. Duke Blackwell, we are honored by your presence. The ambassador has been hoping to speak with you about the Vienna Agreement before the reception begins. Duke, not an honorary title, not a nickname, not a joke. The woman had curtsied. Sebastian took Vivian's arm gently and guided her away from the arriving guests toward the terrace overlooking the Atlantic cliffs. The sound of waves crashing against rocks filled the silence that had expanded between them like a hell breath. You are a duke, Vivian said. Her own voice sounded foreign. Technically, yes. The title descends through my mother's family. Anglo-Irish peerage that somehow survived into the 21st century. He kept his eyes on the ocean. I spend most of my time managing properties and sitting through heritage preservation meetings. It is considerably less glamorous than it sounds. You have been riding the tea. You bought me croissants with exact change. You wore the same sweater 3 times last week. I like that sweater, and those croissants are exceptional. He turned to face her, and she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not the performative concern of a man managing a situation, but the raw worry of someone terrified of losing something that mattered. Vivian, I should have told you sooner. I know that. But when we met in that bookstore, you did not know who I was. You argued with me about Caravaggio. You corrected my pronunciation. You were real. Real. Her voice rose. You lied to me for 4 months. I never lied. I simply did not volunteer information. He reached for her hands. I have attended 1,000 events like the one happening inside right now. I have met countless people who saw the title before they saw me. You did not. You saw Sebastian, the man who cannot properly appreciate Rothko, no matter how hard you try to explain it. The one who makes terrible jokes about Baroque art. Vivian pulled her hands back, thoughts racing. This man, this wonderfully ordinary man who smelled like old books and espresso, was British nobility. I need a minute, she said. Take all the time you need. His voice was very quiet. Though for what it is worth, I am in love with you. Not with some version of you who is impressed by titles. With the woman who told me Vermeer was overrated and meant it. Vivian stared at him, then at the Atlantic, then back at the mansion where people with diplomatic plates were gathering to honor preservation work funded by families like his. The man who brought her chocolate croissants was a duke. She stayed, not because she had forgiven the omission, but because walking away felt like proving the Pembertons right that she could not handle worlds beyond her own. They talked through the entire drive back to Boston, about his childhood shuttling between London townhouses and Irish estates, about the weight of inherited expectations, about why he had wanted, just once, to be seen as simply himself. I was not trying to deceive you, he said as they crossed into Massachusetts. I was trying to be seen. Vivian understood that better than he knew. 6 weeks after Newport, on a Sunday morning in late May, Sebastian led Vivian to the Boston Public Garden. They had walked this route dozens of times, past the swan boats, around the lagoon, stopping at the make way for duckling statues. This time he guided her to a bench overlooking the bronze ducklings, the same bench where they had spent countless Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers. My grandmother was a curator, Sebastian said, pulling a small velvet box from his coat pocket. At the British Museum, back when that was scandalous for a woman of her position. She fought the family to do it. They thought it was beneath her dignity to work. Vivian's heart was hammering. She kept this ring in her desk drawer while she cataloged acquisitions. Said it reminded her that she was more than a title. He opened the box. An emerald surrounded by diamonds caught the morning light and scattered green fire across the bench. She would have liked you, Vivian. Your mind, your stubbornness, the way you refuse to let anyone diminish you. He met her eyes. Will you marry me? Not a duke. Just a man who still cannot pronounce sfumato correctly. The one who wants to spend the rest of his life learning from you. Vivian said yes, not because of the ring or the title or the estate she had never seen, because this man listened to her talk about paint pigments like it was the most fascinating subject in the world. They planned a quiet September wedding in London. And then, in mid-July, the invitation from Portland arrived. Vivian and Sebastian flew into Portland 2 days before the wedding. They checked into the Sentinel Hotel downtown, far enough from the West Hills to avoid any premature encounters. The next morning, she showed him her Portland, Powell's books, where she had spent every Sunday hiding from the Pembertons. The International Rose Test Garden, where 10,000 plants blazed in peak summer glory and Mount Hood floated on the horizon. You loved it here once, Sebastian observed, watching her face. I loved who I thought I could become here, Vivian corrected softly. Someone worthy of being chosen. It took leaving to understand I was never the problem. That evening, she filled out the RSVP card. Simple, direct, Vivian Cross and guest. No explanation of who the guest was. No warning. She mailed it from the hotel lobby. The ducal regalia arrived by courier at 9 the next morning. A reinforced garment bag containing the full ceremonial dress. The midnight blue velvet tailcoat with heraldic insignia embroidered in gold. The silk waistcoat. White gloves. The orders and medals earned through generations of service to the crown. Vivian ran her fingers over the velvet and smiled. You're going to give Constance a heart attack. That, Sebastian said, adjusting his cufflinks, is rather the point. Her own gown hung in the closet. Sapphire silk chosen to match his coat precisely. The emerald ring would be the only jewelry she needed. That night, the night before the wedding, they sat on the balcony with glasses of wine and the city lights glittering below. Last chance to reconsider, Sebastian said. We could sleep in, have breakfast at that French bakery you mentioned, and catch an evening flight home. The Pembertons would never know we were here. Vivian was quiet for a long time, turning the wine glass in her hands. When I left Portland 3 years ago, I believed everything Constance said about me. That I was not good enough. That I did not belong. That I was the problem. She looked at him. I do not believe that anymore. But Constance does. Grant does. Everyone at that wedding tomorrow believes it, because that is the story the Pembertons have been telling. So you want to correct the record. I want them to understand what they threw away. Not because I need their validation. I do not. But because they need to know their judgment was wrong. That worth is not determined by people like them. Sebastian reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing across the emerald. For the record, he said quietly, you are the most remarkable person I have ever met. Title or no title, estate or no estate. I would choose you every single time. I know, Vivian said. That is why this works. Inside the hotel room, the sapphire gown hung waiting. In 12 hours, Vivian Cross would walk back into the world that had rejected her. But this time, she would not be walking in alone. The Pemberton estate had been transformed into a monument to ambition disguised as taste. White silk tents billowed across the manicured lawns. Crystal chandeliers dangled from ancient oak branches, looking faintly absurd in afternoon daylight. A string quartet played near the rose arbor. 300 guests circulated in designer clothes and strategic smiles. Portland's social elite assembling to witness what Constance Pemberton kept calling a perfect union. Constance herself held court near the ceremony entrance, resplendent in champagne silk that probably cost more than Vivian's first year of graduate school. She accepted congratulations with practiced grace, one hand resting possessively on Grant's arm. Sloane is exactly what this family needed, she told anyone who would listen. Grant nodded along, smug in his custom tuxedo. His bride-to-be, Sloane Whitfield, stood nearby in a pre-ceremony dress of white lace and silk that had reportedly appeared in 3 bridal magazines. She was beautiful in the specific curated way of women raised on tennis clubs and discreet cosmetic refinements. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock sharp. At 3:55, guests settled into rows of white chairs facing the arbor. 2 seats in the third row remained conspicuously empty. Several guests whispered about the mysterious Vivian Cross and guest on the seating chart. Probably could not afford the flight, one woman murmured to her companion. Constance said the first wife was struggling. At precisely 4 o'clock, the officiant took his position. The string quartet shifted into the processional. 300 people arranged their faces into expressions of appropriate joy. At 4:02, as the first measured notes of Pachelbel filled the air, a different sound sliced through the atmosphere like a blade through silk. Sirens, distant at first, then closer, then unmistakable. Heads turned. The music stumbled. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Through the estate gates, which security scrambled to open, came a procession that had no business existing in suburban Portland. You already know what came next. You saw at the beginning of this story. But what you did not see was the look on Constance Pemberton's face. It happened in stages. First, confusion. A small furrow between perfectly maintained brows as the motorcade swept up the drive. Then recognition, slow and terrible, as Vivian rose from the Bentley in sapphire silk with an emerald blazing on her left hand. Then understanding, full, catastrophic understanding. Her champagne silk suddenly looked cheap. The crowd parted as Sebastian walked Vivian forward. Not because anyone consciously decided to move. They simply did. The way people instinctively make way for authority they recognize at a cellular level. Sebastian's private secretary, a crisp man in his 50s named Philip who had traveled ahead from London, appeared at his elbow. Your Grace, Mrs. Pemberton is just there. Shall I make introductions? That will not be necessary, Philip. Mrs. Pemberton and I are already acquainted through Vivian. Sebastian's voice carried just far enough for nearby guests to hear. Thank you for managing the security arrangements. Of course, Your Grace. Constance remained rooted to the ground, her face cycling through emotions too rapidly to catalog. Sebastian stopped directly in front of her and executed a polite inclination of his head. Not quite a bow. The deliberate, calibrated gesture of a man being gracious to someone beneath his station. Most people would not have caught the distinction. Constance did. Vivian watched her former mother-in-law's spine go rigid. Mrs. Pemberton, Sebastian said warmly. How kind of you to include my fiancé on your guest list. I do apologize for the tardiness. Diplomatic escorts can be unpredictable with timing. Your Constance's voice emerged strangled. Your fiancé. Vivian and I are to be married in September. Sebastian continued as though discussing brunch plans. At St. George's Chapel, Windsor, my family has certain traditional obligations regarding ceremony locations. He smiled, and it was perfectly pleasant and absolutely devastating. Vivian has told me so much about your family's hospitality during her time in Portland. The word hospitality landed with surgical precision. Constance's mouth opened, closed, opened again. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she could not locate a single appropriate word. Grant had abandoned his position at the altar and was striding toward them, Sloane trailing behind with mounting irritation. His face had gone from chalk white to a blotchy red. His jaw was clenched so tight that Vivian wondered if his dentist would be hearing about this later. We did not realize, Constance finally managed. Of course you did not, Vivian said gently, speaking for the first time since stepping from the car. How could you? We have kept things rather private. She smiled. Not cruelly, but certainly knowingly. Please do not let us disrupt the ceremony. We are simply here to witness Grant's happiness, as you so thoughtfully invited us to do. The officiant, bless him, attempted to restore order. If everyone could please take their seats, we will resume the processional. Nobody was listening. Guests who had been seated were standing, craning their necks. Those near the back pressed forward. Whispers multiplied into a dull roar. Is that actually a duke? The Bentley has royal insignia. That is Vivian, Grant's first wife. The one Constance said was working retail somewhere. Sebastian guided Vivian to their seats in the third row. He arranged his tailcoat with practiced ease. She smoothed her sapphire skirt. The emerald threw green light across the white chairs like tiny, vindictive stars. The ceremony eventually resumed, 20 minutes behind schedule and with all the energy of a eulogy. Grant and Sloane returned to the altar. The officiant rushed through the vows. The string quartet played mechanically, but no one was watching the bride and groom. Every eye in the audience kept drifting to the third row, where a Duke of the British peerage sat beside the woman the Pembertons had discarded for $3,000. Phones appeared despite the unplugged ceremony signs. Someone in the fifth row was openly filming. When the officiant finally pronounced Grant and Sloane married, the applause was perfunctory at best. Sloane's smile looked like cracked porcelain as she walked back down the aisle. Her eyes found Vivian and hardened with understanding. This was supposed to be her day, and it had been obliterated. The cocktail hour descended into beautiful chaos. Vivian and Sebastian had barely risen from their seats when the first wave hit. Portland's elite, the very people who had looked through Vivian for 3 years, suddenly could not approach fast enough. Your Grace, I had no idea you were in Portland. Miss Cross, you simply must tell us about Windsor. Duke Blackwell, my family has connections to the Heritage Foundation in London. Sebastian handled it with flawless diplomatic grace, charming and distant in equal measure. His hand stayed at the small of Vivian's back throughout, a quiet, unmistakable claim. Across the lawn, Constance was trying desperately to redirect attention toward the newlyweds. She had cornered the mayor and was gesturing emphatically at Grant and Sloane. But the mayor kept glancing past her shoulder toward Sebastian, transparently calculating which conversation held more social value. Grant and Sloane stood near the champagne fountain, increasingly isolated. Guests drifted over to offer congratulations, but the interactions were brief and distracted. Everyone wanted to be where the real power was. And the real power was standing in a sapphire gown with an emerald ring, absolutely unbothered by the havoc she had caused simply by existing. The reception moved into the main tent. Dinner was served on china that Constance had ordered from France. The best man finished a meandering toast about Grant's golf handicap. Then Sebastian stood, champagne glass in hand. The tent went silent. Instantly, 300 people recognizing on instinct that when a duke speaks, you listen. Forgive the interruption, Sebastian said, his voice carrying without effort across the space. I know I am merely a guest here, but I would be remiss not to acknowledge what we are truly celebrating today. Every face turned toward him. At the head table, Grant's knuckles had gone white around his champagne flute. We are celebrating new beginnings, Sebastian continued. The courage it takes to leave behind what no longer serves us and to step into the lives we are meant for. Some of us are fortunate enough to recognize value when we see it, to choose substance over status, integrity over inheritance, true partnership over convenient arrangement. His eyes found Vivian across the tent, and his smile was genuine. And some of us are blessed enough to be chosen in return by someone who sees past titles and estates to the person beneath. He raised his glass. To new beginnings, then, and to the wisdom to recognize true worth when we encounter it. He raised his glass, not toward the head table where Grant and Sloane sat, toward Vivian. Half the guests followed suit, raising their champagne toward the wrong couple entirely. The other half looked uncertainly between the head table and Sebastian, unsure where their allegiance should land. Sloane's face had gone scarlet. Grant drained his champagne in one swallow and reached for the bottle. As dinner continued, Constance found her moment. She cornered Vivian near the garden's edge, away from the crowd and the music, in the shadow of an oak tree that had probably watched the Pembertons humiliate people for generations. This was deliberate. The polished veneer had cracked completely. Constance's voice came out in a hiss. You came here to humiliate us, to ruin Grant's wedding. Vivian regarded her former mother-in-law with something that surprised them both: pity. Constance, I came here because you invited me. You invited me because you wanted to parade Grant's upgrade in front of me. You wanted me to sit in that audience and feel the full weight of how far beneath your standards I had always been. You think marrying some British title makes you. I do not think titles make anyone better than anyone else. Vivian's voice was quiet but steady. That is the difference between us. You measure people by bank accounts and bloodlines. I measure them by how they treat others when there is nothing to gain from kindness. She glanced back toward the tent. Through the opening, Grant was pouring himself another drink while Sloane complained loudly to her bridesmaids about the circus her wedding had become. I married Sebastian because he is kind, because he listens, because he thinks my work matters and my opinions have value. The title is just circumstance. Then why come here like this? Constance's gesture took in the Bentley, still parked prominently in the drive. The security detail, the unmistakable pageantry of their arrival. Because you needed to see it, Vivian said simply. You needed to understand that your assessment of my worth was always wrong. Not because I'm marrying a duke, but because worth was never yours to determine. She softened, just slightly. Her next words carried something almost gentle. I hope Grant is happy. I hope Sloane is kind to him in ways your family never taught him to be kind. I genuinely hope they build something real. Vivian turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Constance. The next time you invite someone to an event specifically to make them feel small, make sure you know their whole story first. A faint smile. You will save yourself considerable embarrassment. She walked back toward the tent, where Sebastian was waiting with a wrap. They said their goodbyes. Brief, polite, leaving while they were still the center of gravity. The Bentley pulled away from the Pemberton estate as the sun began to set. Vivian looked back one final time through the rear window. Through the tent's opening, she could see Grant drinking steadily while Sloane's bridesmaids formed a protective circle around the increasingly distraught bride. Constance stood alone near the garden, watching the Bentley's taillights disappear into the Portland dusk. Vivian and Sebastian married that September at St. George's Chapel in a private ceremony witnessed by people who loved them for who they were, not what they represented. The photographs appeared on international society pages. The Pembertons definitely saw them. Vivian became the Duchess of Ravenscroft. But more importantly, she became director of European collections at the British Museum, the same position Sebastian's grandmother had held 70 years earlier. She built a career filled with work she loved, alongside a partner who celebrated every accomplishment. Grant and Sloane divorced within 2 years. The settlement appeared quietly in the Portland Business Journal, a footnote no one particularly cared about. Constance retreated from the social scene. Her standing never quite recovered from the wedding, where she had been upstaged in her own home by the woman she had once paid $3,000 to disappear. Years later, sitting in their London home with rain streaking the windows, Vivian and Sebastian would laugh about the motorcade, about the look on Constance's face, about the toast that hijacked a wedding reception. That entrance was extremely satisfying, Vivian admitted, tucking her feet beneath her on the sofa. Sebastian smiled. It was just the opening statement. And the rest of my life, she said, was the proof. She was right. The real victory was never the dramatic entrance or the stolen spotlight. It was Vivian living fully, knowing her worth, refusing to let narrow judgments define her value. It was choosing herself every single day in ways the Pembertons had never taught her to do. True power is not found in humiliating those who wronged you. It is discovered in becoming so authentically yourself that their opinions lose all weight. Vivian did not need the Pembertons' validation. She never had. She needed her own. The greatest revenge is not a Bentley motorcade at your ex-husband's wedding, though admittedly, that helps. The greatest revenge is a life so genuine, so full, so unapologetically true to your own worth that the people who once dismissed you simply cannot reach you anymore. Their words stop landing. Their judgments stop matching. And you keep going, freer than they will ever understand. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it made you feel something, whether it was satisfaction, hope, or just a quiet reminder that your worth is not decided by people who cannot see it, then this story did its job. New stories drop every week, each one crafted to take you on a ride you will not forget. Hit that. Have you ever walked back into a room that once tried to make you small? We would love to hear your story. See you in the next one.